Christianity by millennia. The gift-giving, the feasting, the decorations all have direct parallels in the Roman festival of Saturnalia and the Norse celebration of Yule. This isn't to diminish your faith, but to deepen your understanding of the holiday's powerful universal themes of light, community, and rebirth. Join me as we celebrate the historical layers revealing how an ancient winter solstice were carefully repurposed to tell a new story. So the first question we need to ask is why Christians celebrate the birth of Jesus on a day that the Bible never mentions. The Gospels of Luke and Matthew describe the nativity scene in detail, telling stories of angels, shepherds, and a manger, but they carefully avoid giving out any specific dates for the event. This silence created a practical problem for early church leaders who wanted to establish an annual celebration without a clear date. They faced the challenge of deciding when this central holiday should occur. This selection was far from random. It was a deliberate and calculated decision made by church authorities in Rome. The choice was not based on newly discovered historical evidence about the actual holiday of Jesus. Instead, it was a strategic move driven by the political and religious landscape of the time. The Roman Empire was undergoing a massive religious shift from paganism to Christianity, and church leaders sought ways to make the transition smoother for the population. They recognized that attempting to simply erase deeply rooted pagan celebrations would meet strong resistance. People were accustomed to their seasonal festivals, which provided structure, meaning, and joy during the darkest time of the year. The strategic calculation was to offer a Christian alternative that coincided with these existing festivities. The birth of the sun, reframed, repackaged, and personified. By superimposing the birth of the Son of God into a date of a major pagan holiday, they provided a familiar framework for a new faith. This decision to align with pre-existing celebrations was a masterstroke of cultural integration, setting the stage for systematic appropriation of pagan symbols and rituals that would define the Christmas that we know today. The choice of December 25th was less about historical accuracy and more about ensuring the new religion's acceptance and survival. Sol Invictus and the sun god's birthday in Rome, December 25th, was already a major holiday long before the birth of Jesus. The empire celebrated the festival of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. This marked the sun's rebirth following the winter solstice, a time when daylight finally begins to lengthen again. Romans honoured this deity with public games, feasts, and rituals, seeing it as a pivotal moment of hope in the darkest part of the year. For the average Roman citizen, this was a familiar and deeply ingrained celebration. They could outright oppose it, condemning it as pagan idolatry, but they risk alienating the very people that they hope to convert. Alternatively, they could find a way to co-opt the holiday to redirect its powerful symbolism towards their own faith. Church leaders, seeing an opportunity in the universal theme of light conquering darkness, chose the latter path. They began to preach a compelling theological parallel, Christ as the true sun, the light of the world. This was not a simple rebranding exercise, it was a profound strategic shift. Instead of fighting against the ingrained cultural practices of the population, the church sought to integrate them. By superimposing the birth of the Son of God into the birthday of the sun, they created a powerful point of connection. The imagery was already resonant, the return of light after the longest night. They simply redirected that hope towards a new Christian narrative. This made the concept of Christ's birth more tangible and immediately understandable to a pagan audience. The transformation of Sol Invictus into Christmas was a deliberate act of theological interpretation. Early Christian apologists drew direct comparisons between the sun god and Jesus, arguing that the former was merely a foreshadowing of the true light that had come into the world. This reinterpretation allowed pagan populations to participate in familiar festivities without feeling that they were abandoning their cultural heritage entirely. They could still celebrate the return of the light, but now with new Christian meaning attached to it. This strategic move was crucial for the spread of Christianity throughout the Roman Empire. It lowered the barrier to entry for conversion. A person didn't have to completely reject the rhythms of their annual calendar. They could now see their traditional winter celebration not as something to be destroyed, but as something to be fulfilled. The public games and feasts could continue, but their central focus would gradually shift from a celestial body to a divine person. This integration has a key element in the great appropriation of pagan traditions, setting a precedent for how the church would handle other popular customs. The decision to align Christmas with Sol Invictus was a calculated effort to make the new faith accessible and appealing, ensuring its survival and growth by weaving it into the existing fabric of Roman life. Saturnalia's shadow on Christmas brings us to a new Roman festival. This left marks on how midwinter was experienced long before a Christian feast took root. Saturnalia was a Roman festival that honoured Saturn, the god of agriculture and time. It took place from December 17th to the 23rd, a period of celebration that turned the normal social order upside down. During this week, masters would serve their slaves at meals, and gambling, normally which was forbidden, was permitted in public. The atmosphere was one of licensed chaos and revelry, where strict social hierarchies were temporarily suspended in favour of feasting and drinking. The exchange of gifts was a central part of Saturnalia. These were not elaborate presents we think of today, but small tokens known as siglaria. These were often small ceramic or wax figurines, candles, or other simple items. The act of giving these tokens was a gesture of goodwill, friendship, and strengthening community bonds during the darkest part of the year. It was a way for people to wish each other luck and prosperity for the coming season. Early Christians, particularly those living in Rome, viewed Saturnalia with deep suspicion and outright condemnation. They saw the festival's excess, the drinking and the role reversal and the focus on a pagan god as everything their new faith was against. Christian writers at the time openly criticised the immorality and the idolatry that they associated with the celebrations. Their initial stance was one of complete separation from such pagan practices. However, as the church grew and its mission turned to converting the vast pagan population of the Roman Empire, this rigid stance hence became Christmas, and it was impractical. Church leaders realised that demanding people abandon their beloved festivals like Saturnalia would create resistance. Instead of fighting the tradition, they began the process of strategic adaptation. The goal was to redirect the energy of the festival towards a Christian purpose. The custom of gift giving was a prime candidate for this repurposing. Rather than trying to stamp out the practice, Christian theologians created a new narrative to explain it. They linked the exchange of gifts to the story of the Magi, the three wise men from the East who brought gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh to the infant Jesus. This provided a biblical precedent that could sanctify the existing social ritual. This adaptation allowed converts to participate in familiar customs without feeling they were betraying their new faith. They could still exchange gifts with friends and family, but now the act was framed as a reflection of the Magi's homage. It transformed a pagan tradition of goodwill into a Christian expression of devotion and generosity. The point was not to preserve the old ways unchanged, but to give them a new acceptable meaning. Integrating Saturnalia's gift exchange into Christmas was part of a broader strategy to ease the transition for pagan populations converting to Christianity. By allowing certain people to retain certain social rituals within a new framework, the church made the faith feel less alien and more accessible. As the calendar settled into late December, the feast gathered practices that spoke to ordinary lives, shared meals, small offerings, in a sense that winter would carry warmth and hope. And just as many customs of giving found a place within the new story, so too did the symbols of life that seemed to defy the season's barrenness, pointing to traditions rooted far from Rome. As midwinter customs converged, one emblem of resilience stood out in the north. the evergreen and its enduring magic. When winter stripped the forests bare, one type of tree remained defiantly green. To the ancient Germanic and Norse tribes, the resilience was not just a biological fact, it was a powerful spiritual reality. The evergreen, whether a pine, fir, or a spruce, stood as a sacred symbol of enduring life. In the face of darkness and death, they believed the spirits, often benevolent but sometimes mischievous, resided within the dense foliage of these trees. These spirits were thought to possess the power to protect a household from malevolent forces, especially during the darkest days of the year. Bringing evergreen boughs indoors was a common practice, a way to invite this protective magic into your home. The scent of pine and the sight of green leaves were tangible assurances that life would persist, that the sun would return and the community would be safeguarded through the cold season. Christian missionaries spreading their faith into Northern Europe encountered these deeply rooted arboreal beliefs. They faced a familiar dilemma: condemn a widespread and meaningful tradition, or find a way to assimilate it into the Christian framework. The choice was very strategic. Instead of banning the practice of bringing evergreens inside, which would have been met with resistance, they offered a new interpretation. The evergreen tree explained why a perfect symbol, not of woodland spirits, but of eternal life offered through Jesus Christ. Just as the tree remained green when everything else was dead, so too did Christ's promise of salvation offer everlasting life beyond the physical death. This theological repurposing led directly to the tradition of the Christmas tree. The custom evolved slowly, with regions developing their own variations. In some areas, people would hang the tree upside down from the rafters as a symbol of Trinity. In others, they would decorate it with apples, hearkening back to the Garden of Eden, and with candles representing Christ as the light of the world. Holly, with its sharp leaves and red berries, took on a complementary symbolism: the crown of thorns and drops of blood. The familiar triangle shapes of many evergreens was also said to symbolize the Holy Trinity. The practice gained wider popularity in Germany, where local guilds and households refined the custom before spreading across Europe and eventually to the rest of the world. The decoration of the tree became a family ritual, a tangible way to enact the themes of hope, light, and eternal life during the Christmas season. The Christmas tree's journey from a pagan symbol of protective magic to a central Christian icon is a clear example of the Church's pragmatic approach to conversion. By mapping a core Christian concept, everlasting grace, into a pre-existing symbol of eternal life, they made the new religion feel less foreign and more resonant. It allowed converts to retain a cherished seasonal practice while understanding it in a completely new context. The tree in the living room is more than just a decoration, it's a living artifact of centuries-old strategy to blend faiths and cultures, a testament to the enduring human desire for light and protection in the depth of winter. Other northern rites carried this same longing into the heart of the home, where warmth, flame, and endurance became signs of hope during the solstice nights. The Yule log carried a great longing into that single deliberate act, a great piece of wood set to burn through the solstice, binding a household to its season. The selection of a Yule log was a serious matter for Norse families. They sought out large, dense oak log, often the entire tree trunk, substantial enough to burn for an extended period. The process was not just about gathering firewood, it was about a careful ritual intended to ensure the log's symbolic power. Before being brought inside, the log might be decorated with greenery, sprinkled with ale or mead, and touched with a lit torch from the remains of the previous year's log. This ceremonial lighting marked the official beginning of the Yule celebrations, connecting the present moments to generations past. Once lit, the log was not allowed to burn out completely. The aim was to keep a portion of it smouldering for the entire 12 days of the festival. Yes, this was in practice an era before matches, but it also carried a lot of a deeper meaning. The continuous flame represented the fragile yet persistent spark of life during the year's darkest days. Families gathered around its warmth, telling stories and sharing food, and their lives revolving around the hearth. The slow, controlled burn served as a tangible countdown to the hoped-for return of the sun, and its survival through the 12 nights was taken as a sign of good fortune for the coming year. Any remaining piece was carefully saved and used to light the next year's Yule fire, creating an unbroken chain from one winter to the next. As Christian missionaries moved into Scandinavia and other Germanic regions, they encountered this deeply ingrained tradition. The Yule log was not a trivial superstition, but a central fixture of domestic and communal life at a critical time. Forbidding it outright would have attacked a core part of people's seasonal identity. Instead, church leaders adopted a strategy of symbolic reinterpretation. They began to preach that light from the Yule log could be understood as a metaphor for Jesus Christ, the light of the world. The log which pushed back the physical darkness of winter nights could represent the Christ illuminating spiritual darkness of sin and death. This reframing allowed the custom to continue with a Christian context, but focus shifted from the celebrating of the sun's return to celebrating the birth of the Son of God. The lighting of the log could be accompanied by prayers, and its enduring flame symbolized by the eternal light of Christ that could not be extinguished. Over centuries, the hearths became smaller and central heating reduced the need for massive fires. The tradition evolved. The great oak diminished to a smaller, manageable piece, often brought in on Christmas Eve, and some places it became the Christmas log, a specifically chosen stick or bundle lit with a ceremony. Today's Yule log persists mostly in symbolic and decorative forms. Many light a large candle shaped like a log for the 12 days of Christmas. Others serve a log-shaped cake as a centerpiece of the feast. The custom of burning an actual log has largely faded, surviving mainly in regional celebrations. Even so, these forms still echo a time when the endurance of one flame mattered, and as wood and flame gave meaning to winter nights, other green emblems gathered their own layers of meaning. Plants once tied to older rites were reinterpreted in many striking ways. Mistletoe held a unique and sacred position in Druidic rituals, primarily because of its unusual nature. Unlike other plants, mistletoe does not grow in the earth but lives as a parasite high in the branches of trees, most notably the oak. The Druids considered this a sign of its divine origin, believing it was a plant that grew between Annwn and earth. They approached its harvest with extreme care and reverence. The ceremony required a golden sickle, as iron was thought to corrupt the plant's magical properties. The mistletoe had to be caught in a white cloth before it touched the ground to preserve its potency. They believed the plant had held powerful properties related to fertility, peace, and protection. It was often used in remedies and potions, and enemies who met under the bough of the mistletoe were expected to lay down their arms and observe a truce. Modern herbalists know the properties of mistletoe help to lower blood pressure, calm anxiety, and support the cardiovascular system. Holly, with its sharp pointed leaves and vibrant red berries, carried a different pagan significance. It was closely associated with Saturn, the Roman god of agriculture and time, and was a common decoration during the festival of Saturnalia. Romans would weave holly wreaths to hang on their doors as a gesture of goodwill and to honour the god. The plant's ability to remain green and bear fruit in the dreaded winter made a natural symbol for protection during the bleakest season. Its sharp leaves were also thought to ward off evil spirits, making it as practical as well as a symbolic decoration for homes. Early Christians who were wary of any association of pagan idolatry initially avoided using both mistletoe and holly in their celebrations. They saw these plants as direct links to the old gods and the superstitious rituals that they were trying to supplant. For a time, the church actively discouraged their use among the faithful. However, this stance became difficult to maintain, especially during periods where Christians faced persecution. In Roman society, refusing to participate in public festivals like Saturnalia would draw unwanted attention and suspicion. Christians living in these conditions needed a way to blend in with their pagan neighbours while still observing their own faith. They found a practical solution in holly, By decorating their homes with holly wreaths, just like everyone else, they could avoid from standing out. From the outside, their house appeared to be celebrating Saturnalia. On the inside, however, they could assign the plant a new Christian meaning. The sharp leaves claim to represent the crown of thorns placed on Christ's head, and the red berries the drops of blood that he shed. This allowed them to participate in the seasonal tradition without feeling they were betraying their beliefs, using the pagan symbol as a protective camouflage. The adoption of mistletoe into the Christmas tradition happened later and followed a different path. Since it lacked the widespread Roman association that holly had, it was not initially used as a tool for blending in. Its incorporation was more theological. Church leaders eventually found a way to reinterpret its pagan symbolism. The white berries of the mistletoe were said to represent the purity of Christ, and the plant itself, which to grow without roots, became a symbol of divine grace and eternal life. The old Druidic association with peace was easily transferred to the Christian message as peace on earth. The custom of kissing under the mistletoe was a much later Victorian invention, but it draws on that ancient idea of the plant fostering peace and reconciliation. The journey of these two plants from pagan sacred symbols to Christmas decorations shows the adaptive strategies early Christians employed, turning potential obstacles into instruments for their faith's survival and growth. Long before the gentle hymns of Christmas carols, the winter nights in rural England were filled with a much louder and more robust tradition, known as wassailing. This was not a quiet reverent, but an activity that was a boisterous community ritual. Groups of villagers would travel from house to house singing loudly and beating on drums or pots and pans. The noise was not merely for a celebration, it served a vital supernatural purpose. They believed that the loud, chaotic sounds would frighten away malevolent spirits that were thought to roam freely during the darkest days of the year. The winter solstice was a time when boundary between the natural and spiritual worlds was considered thin, and communities took active measures to protect themselves. The tradition also had strong social function. As the wassailers went on from door to door, they carried with them a large bowl of warmed ale or cider, often mixed with spices, honey and roasted apples. This drink was the wassail from the Old English phrase was hail, which meant be well or be in good health. When they arrived at a home, they would sing songs that were essentially loud, rhythmic well wishes for the health and prosperity of their household and their land. In return for their noisy performance and good wishes, they expected to be rewarded with a drink from a bowl or with food and money. This custom reinforced the community bonds, ensuring that everyone, especially the less fortunate, could share in the season's feasting. The early Christian church, with its focus on orderly worship and solemn prayer, viewed these raucous processions with deep suspicion. The church authorities saw wassailing as a chaotic pagan holdover that encouraged drunkenness and unruly behaviour. The practice seemed to have more in common with the old pagan fear of spirits than with the new message of Christian salvation. For a time, clergy actively preached against it, attempting to suppress what they considered a vulgar and superstitious custom that had no place in Christian society. However, as with other pagan traditions, outright suppression proved to be impractical. Wassailing was too popular and too deeply woven into the fabric of community life, particularly in agricultural villages. The church's strategy shifted from confrontation to co-option. Instead of trying to stop the singing, they began to redirect it. Missionaries and clergy started writing new lyrics that told the story of Christ's birth, set to the similar catchy tunes of the old wassailing songs. The boisterous noise meant to scare away demons was gradually transformed into a sacred song meant to praise God. This transformation didn't happen overnight. For a long period, both traditions existed side by side. People might sing the rowdy secular wassailing songs on one night and the new Christian hymns on another night. Over generations, however, the religious carols became more dominant, especially as the church's influence grew. The act of going door to door remained one of purpose changed instead of warding off spirits. The goal became to spread the good news of the Nativity. The practice evolved into what we now recognise as Christmas caroling. The communal aspect was preserved, but the focus shifted from a magical ritual for protection to a musical celebration of a religious story. The familiar tunes now carried words that became powerful tools for embedding the Christian narrative into the hearts and minds of the population, turning a pagan noise into a vehicle of worship. When you think about some of our carols that have been preserved, think about the words to deck the halls with boughs of holly. It's a very old wassailing carol, not a Christmas carol. Odin's Wild Hunt and the Santa connection. High above the rooftops of the Norse story spoke of a winter rider whose passing rattled windows and nerves alike. Odin's Wild Hunt, and a surprising link to the figure who we now call Santa. In the long dark winters of Northern Europe, people told stories of a fearsome spectacle in the sky. They spoke of a wild hunt, a ghostly procession led by the Norse god Odin. This was not a joyful parade, but a terrifying event. The belief was that Odin, the All-Father, would ride through the stormy skies with a host of fallen warriors and spectral hounds. The sound of the wind was said to be the baying of his dogs and the galloping of his horse. To witness the wild hunt was considered a dire omen, often foretelling war, plague, or death. It was a reminder of the chaotic, unpredictable power of the gods during the darkest time of the year. Odin's mount was no ordinary horse. He rode Sleipnir, an 8-legged steed described in the myths as the best of all horses. This creature could gallop across the sky and even into the underworld. The image of a bearded god riding a magical horse through the winter night is a powerful one that left a deep impression on the folklore of the region. As the stories evolved over centuries, a specific tradition developed, particularly in Germanic areas. Children will prepare for Odin's winter ride by placing their boots near the chimney or hearth and filled them with straw and carrots for Sleipnir. This offering was intended to feed and sustain the horse on his long, arduous journey through the sky. Sound familiar? In the return for his kindness, Odin might reward the children. He was known as the god of wisdom and poetry, but also magic and gift-giving. The folklore suggests that he would replace the fodder with small gifts, sweets, or tokens of good luck. This practice directly mirrors the custom of leaving out cookies and milk for Santa Claus and his reindeer. The core elements are all there: a benevolent, bearded figure making a nocturnal flight, a magical animal that needs sustenance, and a system of rewards for good children. The connection is striking, and it helps to explain why echoes of the hunt linger in later winter lore. When Christian missionaries began their work in these regions, they encountered a deeply rooted figure of Odin and his traditions that surround him. The church faced the same challenge it had with other pagan beliefs: how to redirect the devotion. The terrifying aspect of the wild hunt was downplayed or condemned as a demonic illusion. However, the more benevolent tradition of gift-giving was too popular to erase. Instead, the church began a process of merging Odin's characteristics with those of Christian figures, most notably Saint Nicholas. Odin's long white beard and his nighttime travels and his role as a gift-giver were gradually transferred to the Christian saint. The 8-legged Sleipnir underwent a transformation as well. In a region with strong reindeer herding traditions, the concept of flying animals that pulled a sled was a natural evolution. The multiple reindeer of the modern Santa story can be seen as folkloric simplification of a single multi-legged mythical beast. This blending of myths created a new composite figure. The pagan god of poetry and war was slowly sanitized and Christianized, his fearsome aspects stripped away until only the kindly gift-giver remained. The custom of leaving out offerings was preserved, but its purpose shifted from feeding a god's supernatural horse to fueling a saint's journey. Seen this way, the wild hunt did not disappear, it was reframed and domesticated. Its dread recast as expectation, and at the centre of what reframing stood a real bishop whose reputation for generosity gave a new story and a human face. The historical figure of Santa Claus was a legend of the 4th century bishop from Myra in modern-day Turkey named Nicholas. He was known for his exceptionist generosity and piety. Stories of his good deeds, particularly secret gift giving to those in need, formed the core of this legend. One famous tale recounts how he provided dowries for 3 impoverished sisters, saving them from destitution by throwing bags of gold through their window, which supposedly landed in stockings drying by the fire. After his death, the church canonized him as St. Nicholas, and his feast day on December the 6th became a day of celebration, especially for children who would receive small gifts in his honour. As veneration of St. Nicholas spread northward to Europe, his legend encouraged the deep-rooted pagan traditions of Germanic and Norse cultures. In the Netherlands, a distinct version of the saint emerged known as Santa Claus. This figure was the synthesis of the Christian bishop and local folk traditions. While he retained the bishop's mitre and ceremonial robes, his character and practices began to absorb pre-existing customs. Most notably, Santa Claus did not walk or ride in a carriage. He arrived on a majestic white horse, a detail with no basis in the original stories of the Turkish bishop. This mode of transportation directly echoed the pagan god Odin and his 8-legged steed Sleipnir, connecting the new Christian tradition to the Old Norse myth of a sky-riding gift giver. Santa Claus was also accompanied by a more ominous figure called Zvarte, or Piet, or Black Peter. These helpers were a far cry from the cheerful elves of the modern Santa story. They were stern figures who carried a sack and birch rod used to threaten naughty children. This element introduced a layer of moral consequences to the gift-giving tradition, reflecting a common theme in European folklore where winter gift-bringers often had a dual nature, rewarding the good and punishing the bad. The Dutch celebration was a complex blend of Christian veneration and folkloric cautionary tales. When Dutch settlers arrived in the New World, they brought the tradition of Sinterklaas with them, establishing in their colony of New Amsterdam, which would later become New York. In the multicultural environment of America, the figure began to change more rapidly. The name Sinterklaas was anglicised to Santa Claus. The strict religious aspects of the bishop began to soften, and the more frightening elements, like Zvarte Piet, were gradually minimised or dropped altogether. The transformation was a process of simplification and amalgamation, making the figure more palatable and less specifically Dutch or Catholic for a diverse population. The single most important document cementing this modern image of Santa Claus was a poem published in 1823, attributed to Clement Clarke, more A Visit from St. Nicholas, more commonly known as 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, provided a detailed and enduring description. The poem did not invent the figure, but codified him. It gave Santa Claus his now iconic number of reindeer and their names. It described him as a jolly old elf, plump and cheerful, with a white beard and a red suit and a bag full of toys. It established his mode of entry via the chimney. Moore's poem took the more various strands of the Sinterklaas legend and the fading memories of the pagan traditions and wove them into a cohesive, family-friendly narrative. This image was then massively popularised in the late 19th and early 20th centuries through illustrations in magazines like Harper's Weekly, particularly those cartoonists named Thomas Nast, and through a later network of advertising campaigns for Coca-Cola. The modern Santa Claus is thus not an ancient figure, but a relatively recent invention, a composite character born from the meeting of a Turkish bishop, a Dutch tradition of Norse mythology, and American commercialism. While the figure of Santa Claus embodies generosity and reward, a darker counterpart has always foreshadowed his winter festivities in many parts of Europe. In the Alpine regions of Austria, Germany, and their neighbours, St. Nicholas does not work alone. He's accompanied by Krampus, a horned demonic figure whose sole purpose was to deal with those who have misbehaved. This pairing creates a stark balance between reward and punishment that is far more intense than the simple threat of receiving a lump of coal. Krampus is a frightening figure. He is typically depicted as a hairy beast with cloven hooves of a goat, horns of a ram, and a long protruding tongue. He carries chains which he shakes menacingly through a bunch of birch branches. He uses them to swat naughty children, and in some traditions he lugs a sack or a basket on his back, not for delivering gifts, but for carrying away the worst offenders. His appearance is not meant to be jolly or whimsical, it's designed to inspire genuine fear. The origins of Krampus predate Christianity, reaching back into pre-Germanic folklore. He is a classic example of one of the wild pagan winter spirits, one of many such figures that were believed to roam the countryside during the darkest and most dangerous time of the year. These spirits represent the harsh, unforgiving aspect of nature itself, the winter famine, the biting cold, the perpetual darkness. They served as a supernatural explanation for the very perils of the season. Krampus, in particular, personified the consequences of straying from community norms and proper behaviour when survival depended on strict social cooperation. When Christianity spread into these regions, the church naturally viewed these celebrations of a demonic goat man with deep disapproval. Clergy saw Krampus tradition as a dangerous and superstitious pagan holdover that glorified a fiendish figure. There were numerous attempts throughout history to suppress Krampus, and there was something called the Krampuslauf, which was where young men dressed as the creature paraded through the streets. The church promoted a sanitized version of the holiday, exclusively focusing on the benevolent Saint Nicholas. Despite these efforts, the Krampus tradition stubbornly persisted, especially in remote alpine villages. The people held on to this part of their cultural heritage because it served such a powerful social and psychological function that purely positive figure of Saint Nicholas could not fulfill. Krampus acted as a crucial foil to the kindly saint. While Nicholas rewarded good behaviour, Krampus embodied the tangible consequences of bad behaviour. This dualistic system offered more complete moral framework for traditional values, using both carrot and stick to encourage proper conduct in children and arguably in adults as well. The survival of Krampus is significant because it demonstrates the limits of the church's strategy of assimilation. While many pagan symbols and dates were successfully Christianized, some traditions proved too resilient to be fully erased or repurposed. Krampus represents a strand of folk belief that was never truly integrated into the Christmas narrative. Instead, it persisted alongside a darker, more primal reminder of the season's origins. The creature embodies an ancient understanding of winter, not just as a time of light and hope, but also as a time of discipline, fear, and natural retribution. In recent years, Krampus has experienced a resurgence in popularity far from the Alps, appearing in films, art, and even greeting cards. This modern rediscovery speaks to the fascination with the shadow side of the holidays. In a season often dominated by commercial cheer, the figure of Krampus reintroduces an element of the grotesque and punitive, a folkloric correcting to the unrelenting sweetness. His continued presence in both traditional celebrations and in popular culture shows that our understanding of the winter holiday is not monolithic. It's a complex tapestry that includes not only light and gift-giving, but also a recognition of darkness and consequence, a duality that has existed since the earliest celebration of the winter solstice. The enduring figure of Krampus ensures that the dark side of the season is never entirely forgotten. On Rome's side of the ledger, one leader articulated the approach with unusual clarity: the political calculus of Pope Gregory the Great. In the year 601, Pope Gregory the Great sent a crucial letter to a group of missionaries that he had dispatched to England. This document contained instructions that would shape the course of Christian expansion across Europe. Gregory advised that a pragmatic method, when encountering pagan populations, the missionaries were to not destroy their temples and holy sites outright. Instead, Gregory instructed them to sprinkle the sites with holy water, build altars, and place relics there. The physical structures were to be preserved and converted into churches. This policy of repurposing, rather than razing, extended beyond buildings to the core of pagan life, their festivals. Gregory's directive was clear: if the people were accustomed to sacrificing cattle to their gods during a certain festival, they should be continued to allow gathering and feasting. The crucial difference would be the purpose. The celebration would be redirected to honour the Christian God and the saints. The people would keep the date, the social gathering, and the festive atmosphere of the theological meaning, but it would all be replaced by Christianity. This was a very strategic calculation, not a theological compromise. Pope Gregory understood that mass conversion was a political and social process as much as a spiritual one. He recognised that demanding peoples abandon every aspect of their cultural identity, their seasonal rhythms, their community gatherings, their familiar places of worship, would create much resistance. A forced, abrupt break with tradition was likely to provoke unrest rather than foster genuine faith. By allowing converts to retain external forms of their customs, the Church made the transition to Christianity feel less disruptive and more acceptable. The logic applied to temples and festivals, and it was equal force to symbols as well. The evergreen tree, the Yule log, the holly wreath, each would be given a new Christian interpretation. The approach minimalised the cultural shock of conversion. A family that always had bought a tree indoors in December to honour the spirits of the forest could now be taught the same tree represented the eternal life found in Christ. The custom remained, but its meaning was transformed. This method allowed the new religion to be woven into the existing fabric of daily life rather than being imposed as a foreign replacement. Gregory's strategy reveals how political and spiritual forces shape cultural traditions, including our modern holidays. Religious expansion is rarely a simple matter of one belief system displacing another. More often, it's a process of negotiation, adaptation, and synthesis. The goal is not to erase the old, but to build the new upon its foundations, redirecting loyalties while preserving familiar forms. This reflects a pragmatic recognition that culture is resilient and that people are deeply attached to their customs. Christmas became a prominent example of this strategy. It was not created from nothing, but constructed atop the framework of midwinter observances already very dear to communities. The Church offered a new story, the birth of Christ, to explain why people were feasting, lighting fires, and exchanging gifts in late December. The results served a unifying purpose. In a diverse world with many traditions, the feast could absorb regional variations while guiding devotion towards a central Christian narrative. That coherence depended on leaders who could translate policy into practice on the ground in places where pagan calendars still governed the year and winter rites held strong. On the ground in Britain, that policy met its first major test with Augustine of Canterbury and his English mission. In 597 AD, a monk named Augustine arrived on the shores of Kent in England. He was not there by chance, but on a specific mission from Pope Gregory the Great. His task was to convert the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, a people with their own rich and deeply ingrained pagan beliefs. The society he encountered was not a blank slate. It was a vibrant culture with its own gods like Woden and Thunor, and sacred calendar that they observed through the nature cycles. One of the most important celebrations was Yule, a festival that marked the heart of the cold season, with feasting, drinking, and sacrifices to the gods. For the Anglo-Saxons, this was a time to honour their deities, ensure the return of the sun, and reinforce the community bonds during the most challenging time of the year. Augustine faced a delicate and potentially dangerous situation. He was an outsider introducing a foreign religion to a powerful king, Ethelbert of Kent, and his people. A direct attack on their traditions, especially a beloved festival like Yule, could have easily provoked hostility and doomed the mission from the start. The people would not willingly abandon the rituals they believed protected them and ensured their survival through the winter. A forceful approach risked not only failure, but also violence. Augustine needed a strategy that would make Christianity appear less like an invasion and more like a fulfillment of their existing way of life. He turned to the instructions he had received from Pope Gregory, which emphasised a policy of assimilation. The directive was clear: do not destroy the pagan temples, but consecrate them as churches. Do not forbid the seasonal festivals, but redirect them. Augustine applied this logic directly to the celebration of Yule. Instead of demonizing that the Anglo-Saxons stopped their feasting and merrymaking, he proposed that they continue. The great halls could still be filled with food and drink. The communities could still gather. The difference would be the reason for the celebration. The feast would no longer honour the old gods, but honour of the birth of Jesus. The timing was already suitable. Yule was near the winter solstice, close to the date the church had established for Christmas. This approach was a practical solution to a complex problem. By allowing the external form of the celebration to remain largely unchanged, Augustine minimised the cultural disruption. People did not have to feel they were losing a cherished part of their lives, and they could keep the social gathering with the food and the sense of the Holy Spirit. What changed was the internal meaning. The focus shifted from appeasing pagan deities to commemorating a Christian story. This reframing made the new religion feel less alien and more like a natural evolution of their own traditions. It allowed for a gradual transition rather than a jarring break. The strategy also served to build crucial communal bonds. The Yule feast was a key event for social cohesion, bringing people together to share resources and strengthen relationships. By incorporating this existing social ritual into the Christian calendar, Augustine ensured that the new church would be at the centre of community life. The Christmas celebration became the new mechanism for maintaining that social fabric that Yule had previously upheld. This made the church an integral part of the community's identity, not an outside force opposing it. The success of this method in Kent became a model for other missionaries across England and beyond, showing how aligning with seasonal observances could anchor the faith in local practice. From there, attention turned to the calendar itself, the midwinter moment everyone already watched, and how its wider patterns gave alignment and meaning. The winter solstice, not just the shortest day of the year, but it also has a specific moment in the sun's journey through the sky. From our perspective on Earth, the sun to travel through a belt of constellations known as the zodiac. The winter solstice marks the precise point where the sun leaves the constellation of Sagittarius and enters the sign of Capricorn. Capricorn is ruled by Saturn. See the familiarity here? This astronomical event held deep symbolic meaning for ancient cultures who closely observed the heavens. The sun's entry into Capricorn was seen as a pivotal turning point, a moment of cosmic significance that coincided with the gradual return of daylight. In the astrological systems that developed in the ancient world, each zodiac sign was believed to be influenced by a particular planet or celestial body. Capricorn, the sea goat, was traditionally ruled by the planet Saturn. This connection was profoundly significant in Roman mythology. Saturn was the god of time, harvest, and disillusion. He represented the cyclic nature of existence and the end of one cycle and beginning of the next. His festival, Saturnalia, was the celebration of this temporal shift, a period of chaos and revelry that acknowledged the death of the old year and the birth of the new. The sun's entry into Saturn's domain at the solstice reinforced this theme of renewal and cyclical time. The astrological alignment provided a natural and powerful framework for celebrating rebirth. For cultures that depended on agriculture, the winter solstice was a time of both fear and hope. The sun had reached its lowest point, and the threat of perpetual darkness was real. The sun's pause and subsequent movement into a new zodiac was interpreted as a cosmic guarantee that light would triumph. The event was not just a seasonal change, but a celestial drama playing out overhead. It was time to perform rituals that mirrored this cosmic rebirth to ensure that the cycle would continue and the sun would regain its strength. Early Christian theologians, many of whom were educated in the classical tradition and familiar with these astrological concepts, saw an opportunity in this pre-existing cosmic narrative. They sought to frame the birth of Jesus as an event of universal, not just earthly importance. By aligning Christmas with the winter solstice and the sun's entry into Capricorn, they could present Christ's nativity as the fulfillment of this ancient celestial symbolism. The birth of the sun became the birth of the sun. The light that was returning to the world was reinterpreted as the spiritual light of Christ, the true light that illuminates all of humanity. This appropriation allowed Christianity to position itself as the ultimate answer to the pagan world's deepest cosmological questions. The story of Christ's birth was no longer confined to a stable in Bethlehem. It was woven into the very fabric of the universe. It was presented as the true meaning behind the astronomical events that pagans had celebrated for millennia. The sun's rebirth was merely a physical shadow of the spiritual rebirth offered through Jesus. This theological move was highly effective. It gave converts a way to see their new faith not as a rejection of their old understanding of the world, but at its completion. The familiar solstice celebration, with its themes of light conquering darkness, could now be seen as a prophecy that was fulfilled in the Christmas story. This strategic alignment ensured that the holiday resonated on multiple levels, tapping into both astronomical rhythms of the natural world and the deep-seated human longing for renewal and salvation. The date of December 25th was chosen not only for its proximity to pagan festivals, but for its place in a grander cosmic calendar. On the ground, communities answered the season with practices that were meant to keep one another safe. Community protection rituals of the winter solstice represented a moment of genuine anxiety for ancient agricultural societies. They did not possess the same understanding of our scientific understanding of the Earth's axial tilt. For them, the suns appeared to be dying, and the days grew progressively shorter and colder, and there was no guarantee that the trend would reverse. This was not an abstract fear, but a tangible threat to survival. A failed return of the sun meant no spring planting, no summer growth, and ultimately famine and death. These communities responded to this annual crisis with a series of rituals designed to influence the cosmos and to safeguard their own existence. These rituals were spiritual acts of communal magic. Lighting large communal bonfires was a primary method of protection. The logic was direct. If the sun's light was fading, humans could create their own surrogate light to hold back the encroaching darkness and encourage the sun to regain its strength. The fire also served as a gathering point, drawing the community together physically and symbolically in a shared act of defiance against the cold and the dark. The warmth and light provided a tangible comfort during the hardest nights of the year. Making noise was another widespread practice. This could involve beating drums, shaking rattles, or simply shouting and singing loudly. This purpose was to drive away the darkness and the malevolent spirits that were believed to gather in the long dark nights. These spirits were thought to be responsible for the sun's weakness and the general misfortune of the season. The chaotic noise was a way to create a protective sonic barrier around the village, scaring off these supernatural threats and clearing the way for the sun's return. This practice, which we saw earlier with wassailing, worked as a form of spiritual defense. Sharing large communal feasts was perhaps the most important ritual for social survival. The solstice period was a time of scarcity when food stores had to be carefully managed to last until the spring. By pooling resources and holding a feast, the community reinforced the bonds of mutual obligation that were essential for getting through the winter. It was a way to ensure that even the poorest members had something to eat, strengthening the social fabric at its most vulnerable point. The feast was an act of faith in the future and a reaffirmation of the community's commitment to one another. These practices were not just about spiritual belief, they were crucial for maintaining a social cohesion. In a time of heightened fear and resource scarcity, the rituals provided a structured way for the community to act in unison. They channeled collective anxiety into purposeful activity, transforming passive fear into active participation. The shared experience of lighting the fire, making noise and eating together reinforced the idea that they would survive the winter as a group, not isolated individuals. The social solidarity was as vital as any stored grain or firewood. When Christianity spread through Europe, it encountered these deeply ingrained community protection rituals. The Church recognised their power and their importance to social stability. Instead of banning them, Christian leaders absorbed these practices into the celebration of Christmas. The great bonfires, reinterpreted as celebrations of Christ, the light of the world. The noisy processions were transformed into joyful singing of Christmas carols. The communal feast became the Christmas dinner, a time for families, communities to gather and reaffirm their bonds. The holiday season became the new framework for these ancient community building exercises. The underlying human needs remained the same: the desire for light in darkness, for protection from harm, and for strong social connections during a difficult time of year. Christmas provided a new theological justification for these actions, but their social function was preserved. Yet not everyone welcomed their inheritance. Some later Christians looked at these continuities and saw a compromise rather than wisdom, setting the stage for a sharp backlash within the faith itself. By contrast, other communities marked midwinter with an entire season. The 12 days of Christmas and Yule, the tradition of celebrating the 12 days, stretches back long before the Christmas season as we know it. For Norse and other Germanic peoples, the period surrounding the winter solstice was not a single event, but an extended season known as Yule. This was a time when normal rhythms of life were suspended. The darkest days of the year demanded a communal response, and the festivities were designed to span the critical juncture of the disappearance of the old sun and the tentative return of the new. The 12-day time frame reflected an observed cycle in the heavens, marking the span of which the sun showed a clear increase in light after the solstice. Prolonging the celebration helped maintain the morale and social bonds during the most challenging time of year. When Christian missionaries began their work in Northern Europe, they encountered this deeply embedded 12-night feast. The church recognised that replacing the long-established season with a single day on December 25th. People were accustomed to a stretch of celebration though, not a brief pause. In a strategic move, the church designated the days of Christmas Day, the 25th, to Epiphany, January the 6th, as the Christmas season. This period received a specific Christian narrative. Christian Day commemorated the birth of Jesus, while Epiphany, or the 12th night, marked the arrival of the Magi with their gifts. The framework absorbed the existing pagan time frame while filling it with distinct meanings rooted in the gospel story. This adoption provided a familiar structure for new converts. They could continue extended feasting and merrymaking, but now the revelry was orientated towards a theological purpose. The 12 days of Christmas became a season with prayers and readings that unfolded the Nativity and its aftermath. The defined span could help organise social and economic life, setting clear boundaries for the celebration and for the return to work. The concept of the 12 days shaped particular customs. The popular culminative song, The 12 Days of Christmas, though its origins are debated, echoes the practice of gifts or observances on successive days. The tradition of waiting until the 12th night to remove decorations also stems from this period. Leaving greenery up beyond this date was often considered bad luck, like reflecting older ideas that the protective power of evergreens was tied to the sacred season. 12th night itself often became a climatic feast, sometimes with the playful role reversals reminiscent of Saturnalia, showing how older customs could linger within a Christian framework. The Christianization of the Yule period illustrates the Church's pragmatic approach of timing. Rather than resisting the existing calendar, leaders redefined it. The 12-day structure was a direct adoption of the pagan feasting season, repurposed to centre the Nativity and the visit of the Magi. The move embedded the Christian story into the annual cycle, ensuring that the message of Christmas was not confined to a single date, but unfolded across days marked by community worship and shared meals. The framework provided a durable container for a synthesis of traditions, blending ancient social needs with new religious narratives in a way that still shapes how many observe the late December and early January period. Even so, the older idea of Yule as the solstice-centred season never fully vanished. It continued in folk memory and in time will consciously be revived by those who preferred to keep their midwinter rites aligned with the returning of the sun itself. The commercialisation of Christmas in the modern era was another shift that took hold. The commercialisation of Christmas moved centre stage, reshaping how the season was organised and understood. The Industrial Revolution of the 19th century set the stage for Christmas to undergo its next major transformation. As society shifted from agrarian to industrial economies, mass production made consumer goods more affordable and widely available. This economic change created conditions for a new kind of holiday centred around the purchase and exchange of material items. The sentimental Victorian era, with its emphasis on family, childhood and domestic life, provided the cultural backdrop. The modern commercial Christmas began to take shape during this period, adding yet another layer to the holiday's complex history. Marketing and advertising played a decisive role in standardising the holiday's imagery. The figure of Santa Claus, who had existed in various folk forms for centuries, was consolidated into a single recognisable icon. The 1823 poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, offered a detailed descriptions, but the illustrations of Thomas Nast in Harper's Weekly throughout the 1860s and 70s gave Santa his modern visual identity. Nast depicted him as a plump, jolly man with a white beard, dressed in fur-trimmed red suit, working in a toy shop at the North Pole. This image was then amplified and cemented into the public imagination by Coca-Cola advertisements starting in the 1930s, which used the figure to promote winter soda sales. Santa became an ambiguous figure of cheerful consumption, gift-giving, a tradition with roots in Saturnalia, and the Magi was reimagined by this commercial engine. What had once been small tokens of goodwill or handmade presents transformed into a major economic activity. Department stores, a new invention of the 19th century, quickly realised the potential of the Christmas season. They mounted elaborate holiday displays, created dedicated shopping sections, and promoted the idea that expressing love and happiness required the purchase of a store-bought good. The pressures to participate in this consumer ritual grew, turning gift-giving from an optional custom into the mandatory social expectation. The holiday became crucial for the retail economy businesses, depending on year-end sales to ensure profitability. The season now combines religious, pagan and consumerist elements, often coexisting in the same household. A family might attend a church service on Christmas Eve, decorate a tree with ancient symbolic origins and focus on the exchange of gifts the next morning. The underlying themes of midwinter persist. The emphasis on light, candles, Christmas lights, glowing windows still answers the human need for hope in the darkest time of year. The focus on generosity, even when expressed through purchases, reflects the ancient imperative to strengthen community bonds during scarcity. Commercialisation has not erased this deeper impulse, it has given them a new vocabulary and a new scale. Many people now try to balance the marketplace with practices that reconnect them to meaning. Charitable giving, simpler rituals, homemade gifts, or a time set aside for quiet reflection. Seen in this way, the commercial era is another strand added to a long weave. It sits alongside sacred stories, folk survivals, and seasonal rites, not replacing them but altering their proportions. From Saturn's feast to Santa's storefronts, the holiday has gathered influences as it travelled, setting up a broader view of what Christmas actually is and how so many different parts of it came to live under one name. As you decorate your tree or exchange gifts this year, remember you're participating in a story much larger than any single tradition. Christmas is a story of integration. Its history shows that cultures grow by weaving new threads of old fabrics. The deepest meaning of the season lies not in the purity, but in its ability to answer a timeless human need for light and warmth in the darkest days. The birth of the sun after the solstice has been a celebration around in many corners of the earth for thousands of years. Let it be an invitation to notice where your rituals come from and what they still offer. Share a tradition's origin at the table or start one that honours both memory and renewal. Thanks for watching.